The Darwin Awards are named for Charles Darwin, the 19th century naturalist whose work on natural selection described how species change over generations based on which individuals survive long enough to reproduce. The awards apply that framework to a specific category of human death, cases in which a person, through an act of spectacularly poor judgment, removes themselves from the gene pool. The criteria are strict. The event must be verified by real sources and real witnesses. The judgment must be not merely careless, but uniquely, sensationally stupid. The person must be past the legal driving age and of sound mind, old enough and capable enough to have known better, and they must have done it entirely to themselves. Take someone else with you, and you do not qualify. Larry Walters strapped weather balloons to a lawn chair in 1982 and floated over Los Angeles at 16,000 feet. He survived, so he never qualified. Timothy Treadwell lived among grizzly bears in Alaska for 13 summers and was killed by one in 2003, but his girlfriend died alongside him, which disqualifies him under Rule 4. The cases in this video are the ones that passed all 4 tests. Verified, uniquely stupid, old enough to know better, done entirely to themselves. Here is every Darwin Award we could actually verify. The idea did not begin as a formal institution. It started in the mid-1980s as a recurring joke passed around Usenet newsgroups, the early online discussion boards that predated the modern internet, where users traded stories of fatally bad decisions under the shared premise that Darwin himself would have approved of the outcome. The joke stayed informal and undocumented for the better part of a decade. In 1993, Wendy Northcutt, then a biochemistry researcher at Stanford University with an undergraduate degree in molecular biology from UC Berkeley, began collecting these stories in a more systematic way, sorting through newspaper accounts from around the world and rewriting them into short summaries she circulated to a small email list. She founded DarwinAwards.com not long after, and the site grew from a personal side project into what became, by its own later account, one of the most visited humor destinations on the early web, drawing millions of page views a month by the early 2000s. Northcutt eventually left laboratory research entirely to run the archive full-time and went on to publish a series of books collecting the vetted cases, starting with the Darwin Awards, Evolution in Action in 2000. The vetting process she built is the reason any of this holds together as something more than folklore. Submitted stories are checked against news coverage, court records, police statements, and other primary sources before they are marked, in the language of the site itself, as confirmed true by Darwin. Most submissions never clear that bar. The ones in this video did. Lawyer tests glass. The Toronto Dominion Centre is a pair of black steel and glass towers in the financial district of downtown Toronto, Ontario, completed in 1967 and designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. The complex was built to exacting commercial standards, and its exterior glass, the kind fitted into the curtain wall facades that define that era of corporate architecture, was manufactured to withstand considerable force. The towers were considered a prestige address. The law firm of Holden Day Wilson occupied space on the 24th floor of one of those towers, and by 1993, it was a well-established firm operating in the middle of a city that took its financial and legal institutions seriously. None of that context is incidental. It matters because the man at the center of this story was not a reckless person by any general measure. He was a senior partner. He was trusted with clients, with cases, with the professional reputation of the firm. The building he worked in every day was a monument to careful engineering. He knew that. Gary Hoy had made this demonstration before. That is the first and most important thing to establish. On at least one prior occasion, Hoy had thrown himself shoulder first into the boardroom window on the 24th floor to show articling students, the junior lawyers beginning their careers at the firm, that the glass was unbreakable. He had done it. The glass had held, and he had bounced back from it. The demonstration was a kind of performance, a confidence display, a piece of theater designed to communicate something about the building, or about him, or about the solidity of the world they all operated in. It had worked before. There was no reason, from Hoy's point of view, to think it would not work again. On July 9, 1993, Hoy was in the boardroom with a group of articling students. The meeting had the character of an orientation or a social event, the kind of gathering in which a senior partner might be expected to be impressive. The boardroom overlooked the public square of the Dominion Centre, 24 floors below. The windows were floor-to-ceiling glass panels set in frames, standard construction for a building of that era and that prestige. The glass itself, as it had before, would hold. Hoy knew this. He had proven it. This is what made the demonstration feel safe to him. Hoy stepped back from the window to give himself a running distance. The motion he used was a shoulder charge, the same motion used in the prior demonstrations, body leading, weight concentrated in the upper arm and shoulder directed at the glass panel. He ran at the window and threw himself into it. The glass did not break. This part went exactly as intended. The pane flexed under the impact force, absorbed it, and held together structurally, which is precisely what high-grade commercial glass is designed to do. The glass was not the problem. The frame was the problem. The window pane was set into a frame that was mounted into the building's exterior wall, and it was the frame, not the glass, that failed under the load. The force of Hoy's body striking the pane was transmitted outward through the glass and into the frame, and the frame, rather than the glass, gave way under that force. The entire assembly, the glass panel and the frame holding it, separated from the exterior wall of the building. The pane did not shatter. It came out whole. Hoy went through the open space where the window had been. There was no glass to stop him, because the glass had moved with the frame, and the frame had separated from the wall. One moment he was in the boardroom. The next there was no window where he had been standing. He fell 24 floors to the courtyard of the Dominion Center below. The glass pane fell separately, landing in the same courtyard. When investigators and reporters examined the scene afterward, they noted that the glass pane was intact. It had not broken at any point during the impact or during the fall. Gary Hoy had been correct. The glass was unbreakable. It was the frame that killed him. The articling students in the boardroom called emergency services immediately. Toronto police and paramedics responded to the Dominion Center and entered the courtyard from street level. The scene they encountered was the aftermath of a 24-story fall. The glass pane lay in the courtyard nearby, unbroken, as it had been when it separated from the wall. First responders reached Hoy and assessed his condition. Injuries sustained in a fall from 24 floors are not compatible with survival. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The responding personnel documented the courtyard, the building's exterior wall where the window frame had separated, and the position of the glass pane. The coroner's report that followed was specific on the point of causation. The glass had not failed. The frame had failed. The report documented the cause of death as injuries sustained in the fall, and it noted the mechanism, the window frame separation from the exterior wall, not the fracture of the glass itself. This was, in a narrow technical sense, a vindication of everything Hoy had been demonstrating. He had been arguing for the strength of the glass. He was right about the glass. The Law Society of Upper Canada reviewed the circumstances. The Toronto Star covered the story. It became, in the years that followed, one of the most widely reported and discussed cases in Darwin Award history, in part because of the sheer structural irony of the outcome, and in part because of what happened next. In 1996, Gary Hoy was officially awarded a Darwin Award for his fatal demonstration. He became one of the most famous early cases in the organization's history. In 1996, 3 years after Hoy's death, the law firm of Holden Day Wilson dissolved. Parachute suit jump. Franz Reichelt was born in Austria in 1879 and moved to Paris in the early 1900s, where he established himself as a tailor. He was skilled at his work and ran a successful dressmaking business. Sometime around 1910, he became consumed by a problem that had been occupying the minds of a number of inventors in the early years of powered flight. What happens to a pilot when the aircraft fails? Aviation was new. Planes came down unexpectedly and often fatally. Reichelt believed the answer was a wearable parachute, a garment that would allow a pilot to separate from a falling aircraft and descend safely. He began designing one. Between 1910 and early 1912, Reichelt built and tested multiple versions of his parachute suit. The test method he used was a dummy, a human-shaped form that he dropped from the 5th floor of his apartment building in Paris. The results of these tests were not encouraging. The suit failed to deploy correctly on multiple occasions. The fabric did not billow outward and generate drag in the way a parachute requires. It collapsed inward, wrapping around the dummy rather than opening above it. The dummy fell fast. Reichelt adjusted the design. He ran more tests. The suit kept failing. A reasonable person looking at the data from these tests would have concluded that the design needed significant further development before it was ready for a live human test. Reichelt concluded differently. He applied to Paris police authorities for permission to conduct a test from the Eiffel Tower's first platform. The Eiffel Tower had been completed in 1889 as a temporary structure for the World's Fair and had been retained as a functioning piece of Paris infrastructure. Its first platform sat at approximately 57 meters above the Champ de Mars below. Reichelt's application stated that he intended to use a dummy for the test. This was not true. He intended to jump himself. Whether he told authorities otherwise deliberately, or whether there was a misunderstanding in the communication, is not entirely clear from surviving records, but what is clear is that permission was granted based on the understanding that a dummy would be used, and that Reichelt arrived on the morning of February 4th at 1912, wearing the parachute suit himself. The press had been notified. A Pathé newsreel camera crew was present at the base of the tower, positioned to film the test. Reporters and onlookers had gathered. A Paris police officer was on site. Photographs taken that morning show Reichelt at the first platform railing, wearing the suit, which was a large, voluminous garment designed to unfurl during descent. He spoke with reporters. He expressed confidence in the device. He had built it. He understood, at least in theory, how it was supposed to work. The crowd below watched him move to the railing. Witness accounts from that morning, corroborated by photographs taken at the platform, indicate that Reichelt stood at the edge for approximately 40 seconds before jumping. 40 seconds is a long time to stand at the edge of a 57-meter drop. Whether he was experiencing hesitation, making final preparations, or simply waiting for the camera to be ready is not recorded. What is recorded is that he jumped. The Pathé camera captured the entire sequence from the moment of the jump forward. Reichelt stepped off the railing of the first platform of the Eiffel Tower. He fell. During the descent, the parachute suit began to move, the fabric shifting as air moved around it, but it did not open in any meaningful sense. The design that had failed repeatedly in tests from the 5th floor of his apartment building failed again here, at 57 meters, with a human being inside it. The fabric of the suit collapsed around his body rather than billowing outward. The drag generated was negligible. Reichelt fell the full 57 meters at a speed close to that of an unsupported human body in free fall. He struck the frozen ground of the Champ de Mars below the tower. Contemporary press accounts, published the following day in Paris newspapers, noted that the impact left a visible indentation in the frozen ground. Photographs taken at the impact site were published alongside the reporting. The crowd that had gathered to watch the test was present for the landing. The Pathé newsreel camera captured the moment of impact and the reaction of the onlookers. Physicians were present or arrived quickly. Reichelt was found dead at the scene. A post-mortem examination was conducted, and the injuries documented were consistent with a fall from significant height, at close to terminal velocity, a broken leg, a broken arm, and severe internal injuries. He was 32 years old. The cause of death on the official record was the injuries from the fall, which is accurate as far as it goes, though the more complete answer is that the parachute suit he had designed, built, tested unsuccessfully on multiple occasions, and then worn while jumping from the Eiffel Tower did not work. The Pathé newsreel footage was developed and released. It became one of the earliest filmed records of a human fatality and remains available in public archives today. Investigators and engineers who examined the suit after the incident reached the same conclusion the dummy tests should have suggested. The surface area of the fabric was insufficient to generate the drag necessary to slow a human body, and the design caused the suit to collapse inward during descent rather than opening outward. The same flaw that had been documented in every dummy test was present in the final test. Nothing about the suit had changed between the 5th floor dummy trials and the 57-meter human trial, except the height and the person inside it. Courtroom self-defense. Clement Vallandigham had lived a genuinely remarkable life before he died in a hotel room in Lebanon, Ohio, on June 17, 1871. He had served as a United States Congressman representing Ohio's 3rd District. He had been the most prominent leader of the Copperhead Democrats, the faction of the party that opposed the Civil War during Abraham Lincoln's presidency. In 1863, Lincoln had him arrested, tried by a military tribunal for expressing sympathy with the enemy, and exiled to the Confederate South. Vallandigham had made his way to Canada from there and had eventually returned to the United States after the war ended, resuming the practice of law in Ohio. By 1871, he was a well-known attorney, a public figure with a national profile and the lead defense counsel in a murder trial in the small city of Lebanon. The case was the state of Ohio versus Thomas McGahan. McGahan was accused of fatally shooting a man named Tom Myers during a dispute at a bar. The prosecution's theory was straightforward. McGahan had drawn his pistol and shot Myers deliberately. Vallandigham had developed a different theory, and he believed it was the kind of theory that could win the case. His argument was that Myers had not been shot by McGahan at all. Myers, Vallandigham intended to argue, had accidentally shot himself. The mechanics of it, as Vallandigham understood them, involved Myers reaching into his pocket for his pistol, the weapon catching on the fabric of the pocket during the draw, and discharging upward into his own body. It was a plausible theory, given the wound location and the circumstances of the bar fight. Vallandigham needed to demonstrate it convincingly to the jury. On the evening of June 16, 1871, Vallandigham was in his hotel room adjacent to the courthouse in Lebanon. Several fellow attorneys were with him. He was working through the physical demonstration he intended to present to the jury the following day, rehearsing the mechanics of how Myers's pistol could have discharged accidentally during a pocket draw. To do this, he needed a pistol. He retrieved two from his belongings, one that was unloaded and one that was loaded. He intended to use the unloaded weapon for the demonstration. He picked up one of the pistols and began demonstrating the motion to the attorneys in the room. He showed them how a pistol could catch on a coat pocket during a draw, how the angle of the barrel in that position would direct a discharge upward into the body of the person carrying it, and how Myers's wound was consistent with exactly that kind of accidental discharge. He did not verify which pistol he had picked up. He was holding the loaded one. The pistol discharged during the demonstration. The ball entered Vallandigham's lower right abdomen. The attorneys in the room responded immediately, and one of them later reported that Vallandigham's first words after the gun fired were directed at the other men present. He said, "That is the gun that killed Thomas Myers." He understood immediately what had happened and what it meant, both for himself and for his client's case. A physician was summoned to the hotel room without delay. The physician who examined Vallandigham assessed the wound. A ball to the lower right abdomen in 1871, before antiseptic surgery and before reliable anesthesia, was a serious and frequently fatal injury. The ball had caused internal bleeding, and the risk of peritonitis, the infection of the abdominal cavity that killed the majority of abdominal gunshot wound victims in that era, was high. The physician could do relatively little beyond managing the immediate situation. Vallandigham was kept in the hotel room through the night. The other attorneys remained. His condition through the night was not one of improvement. Clement Vallandigham died on the morning of June 17, 1871, approximately 12 hours after he had shot himself, while demonstrating to fellow attorneys how Tom Myers had accidentally shot himself. He was 50 years old. The cause of death was internal bleeding and the onset of peritonitis resulting from the abdominal wound. The trial of Thomas McGahan continued. The jury, which had presumably heard some account of what had occurred in the defense attorney's hotel room the evening before, retired to deliberate. They returned a verdict of not guilty. The precise degree to which Vallandigham's accidental self-shooting influenced the jury's thinking is not recorded, but the case he had been building, that an accidental pocket draw discharge was a plausible explanation for Myers's wound, had just been demonstrated at fatal cost by the defense attorney himself. Vallandigham's death was reported in newspapers across the country. He is buried in Dayton, Ohio. His case is remembered in American legal history as one of its more singular footnotes, the defense attorney who proved his own argument in the most direct possible way and did not survive to hear the verdict. Barrel meets rim. Karel Soucek was a Canadian stuntman from Hamilton, Ontario, who had spent the early part of the 1980s developing a stunt that had been attempted by a small number of daredevils over the preceding century, going over Niagara Falls in a barrel. The falls, specifically the Horseshoe Falls on the Canadian side, drop approximately 57 meters into the Niagara River below. The water at the base is turbulent and the pressure from the falling water is extreme. A barrel capable of surviving the trip needed to be structurally robust, well padded on the interior and weighted correctly to maintain orientation during the fall. Soucek built one. In July of 1984, he climbed into his custom-built barrel at the top of Niagara Falls and went over. He survived. He sustained minor injuries and spent time in recovery, but he was alive. Canadian authorities fined him for performing an illegal stunt, which is a standard outcome for Niagara daredevils, and Soucek emerged from the experience as a minor celebrity. Soucek's relationship with Niagara Falls predated the 1984 barrel, run by several years. In July of 1976, he had made a barrel trip through the Whirlpool Rapids, downstream of the falls, a stretch of the Niagara River known for violent churning currents rather than a sheer drop, and had become stranded there for roughly 3 hours before a ground crew reached him. He was arrested afterward by Niagara Parks Police for performing a stunt without a license, and the trip earned him a $500 fine in Ontario Provincial Court. That fine, and the arrest that came with it, did not stop him. For the 1984 Horseshoe Falls attempt, Soucek was methodical in a way that reflected the earlier experience. He researched previous barrel attempts going back decades, sent unmanned test barrels over the falls to study how the current handled them, and dropped his own barrel off the Niagara escarpment near his home in Hamilton to test how well its interior padding absorbed impact. The barrel itself, 9 feet long and 5 feet in diameter, was built from lightweight metal and plastic, insulated with liquid foam, and fitted with a snorkel and a two-way radio so his ground crew could track him. On the morning of July 2nd, 1984, 4 assistants pushed the barrel into the river roughly 1,000 feet above the brink of Horseshoe Falls. The drop itself took a little over 3 seconds. Soucek then spent nearly 45 minutes trapped in the turbulent water below the falls before his crew could secure the barrel and pull him out. He emerged with cuts, bruises, a chipped tooth, and an injury to his arm, and, consistent with the outcome of his first Niagara stunt 7 years earlier, a $500 fine for performing the stunt without a license. He had now gone over or through the Niagara River twice, survived both times, and paid the same fine twice. Following the Niagara stunt, Soucek began developing what he described as an indoor recreation of the barrel drop. The concept was to scale the experience for an arena environment. A barrel dropped from a significant height into a water tank positioned on the arena floor, with a live audience present. The engineering challenge was the relationship between height, the size of the water tank, and the accuracy required to land the barrel in the water rather than beside it. At Niagara, the target was the entire Niagara River, which is wide enough to accommodate significant variation in trajectory. In an arena, the target would be fixed and small. The venue secured for the stunt was the Houston Astrodome in Houston, Texas. The Astrodome, which had opened in 1965 as the world's first multi-purpose dome sports stadium, had an interior ceiling height that allowed for a substantial drop. The event was scheduled for January 19, 1985, as a halftime attraction during a monster truck show. Attendance was approximately 45,000 people. The setup required a barrel to be raised to approximately 180 feet, the usable interior height available for the stunt, directly above a water tank positioned on the arena floor. The water tank measured 9 feet in depth and 12 feet in diameter. The geometry of this arrangement deserves precise attention because it is the geometry that determined what happened. A 12-foot diameter tank is not a large target when viewed from 180 feet above it. The barrel released from that height would fall in approximately 3 seconds. Any lateral movement imparted to the barrel at the moment of release would carry it off the center line of the tank. During those 3 seconds, the margin for error was small. The release mechanism was the critical component. It needed to drop the barrel straight down, without any sideways force, on a true vertical line to the center of the tank. On the evening of January 19, 1985, the barrel was raised to the ceiling of the Astrodome with Soucek inside it. 45,000 people in the arena watched. The barrel hung at approximately 180 feet above the arena floor, directly above the water tank. The release mechanism was activated. The mechanism malfunctioned. At the moment of release, the barrel was given lateral movement, a sideways component to its velocity that it should not have had. Instead of falling straight down along a vertical line to the center of the tank, the barrel began moving at an angle during its descent. It drifted from the center line during the 3 seconds of the fall. The barrel did not land in the water. It struck the rim of the tank, the steel edge of the water container, at the end of a 180-foot fall. The difference between landing in 9 feet of water, which would have absorbed the impact force gradually over the depth of the tank, and striking the steel rim of that same tank, which absorbed nothing, transferred the entire kinetic energy of a 180-foot fall directly into the barrel and into Soucek's body inside it. The impact was immediate and total. Emergency personnel stationed on the arena floor moved to the barrel as quickly as they could cross the distance. They extracted Soucek from inside the barrel. He was alive but unconscious, and the injuries he had sustained from the impact force transmitted through the barrel structure were severe. Arena medical staff provided initial stabilization while an ambulance was called to the floor of the Astrodome. He was transported to a hospital in Houston and admitted to intensive care. The medical team assessed the internal injuries. Karel Soucek died on January 20th, 1985, 1 day after the stunt, from the injuries he had sustained when the barrel struck the rim of the tank. He was 37 years old. The cause of death was the trauma from the impact, which was entirely a function of the barrel missing the water. In subsequent reporting on the incident, journalists consistently noted the same structural contrast. Soucek had survived going over Niagara Falls, a 57-meter drop into one of the most powerful waterways in North America, and had been killed in a controlled indoor environment by a 12-foot tank and a malfunctioning release mechanism. Survived falls slipped. Bobby Leech was a British-born stuntman who had spent years in the Niagara Falls region in the early 20th century, developing a steel barrel for the purpose of going over the falls. He was not the first person to attempt the stunt. Annie Edson Taylor had done it in a wooden barrel in 1901 at the age of 63 and survived. Leech built a steel barrel, which offered more structural protection than wood, and trained and prepared for the attempt with the specific engineering of the barrel in mind. He went over Niagara Falls in his steel barrel in 1911. He survived. The injuries he sustained, however, were significant: 2 broken kneecaps and a broken jaw. These required several months of hospital recovery before he was mobile again. He emerged from the experience as a well-known figure in the daredevil world of the early 1900s, someone who had done one of the most famous, dangerous things a person could do, and had lived. In the years following the Niagara stunt, Leech traded on the achievement in the standard way available to stuntmen of his era: public appearances, interviews, speaking engagements, and promotional tours. He spoke about the barrel, about the falls, about the physics and experience of going over Niagara. He was a minor celebrity of a very specific kind, the kind whose fame rests entirely on a single feat, and he traveled to promote that feat in the years after he had performed it. By 1926, he was in his late 60s and was undertaking a promotional tour through New Zealand. He arrived in Christchurch, in the South Island, in April of that year as part of the circuit of public appearances. The schedule in Christchurch was routine. It involved the kind of activities that promotional tours involve: arriving at venues, meeting people, giving accounts of the Niagara experience, being photographed, being interviewed. There was nothing on the schedule that carried any physical risk. Leech was not performing stunts in New Zealand. He was talking about the stunt he had performed 15 years earlier in Canada. The trip was not dangerous. It was publicity. While walking on a street in Christchurch, Bobby Leech stepped on an orange peel. The orange peel caused him to slip. He fell. The fall resulted in a broken leg. A broken leg, at 67 or 68 years of age, in 1926, before the widespread availability of modern orthopedic surgery or antibiotics, was a serious medical event. The fracture site or the wound associated with it developed an infection. In an era before penicillin, which would not become clinically available until the 1940s, bacterial infections in bone or surrounding tissue were difficult to control and frequently fatal if the infection advanced into the bloodstream. Leech's infection did not resolve. Physicians monitoring his condition determined that the infection was progressing in a way that threatened his life if the leg was not removed. The decision was made to amputate the leg. Leech underwent the amputation procedure in New Zealand. The surgery removed the infected limb with the intention of halting the spread of the infection. Post-amputation, however, Leech's condition did not stabilize. The infection continued to advance. His body, at his age and given the medical tools available in 1926, could not contain it. Bobby Leech died on April 26, 1926, in New Zealand. The cause of death was the complications of the infection that had followed the break, that had followed the fall on the orange peel. The causal chain was direct and unambiguous. Orange peel, slip, fracture, infection, amputation, death. He was a man who had survived Niagara Falls in a steel barrel and had spent 15 years afterward telling people about it. He died from a piece of citrus fruit on a New Zealand pavement. News of his death was reported internationally, and the coverage was almost universally framed around the same central observation. The man who had gone over Niagara Falls had been killed by an orange peel. The irony was noted in every report because it was impossible not to note it. Leech and Soucek, separated by 74 years and connected only by the waterfall they had both survived, represent the same structural fact about the Darwin Award cases. The qualifying event is rarely the most dramatic thing the person has done. It is the thing that comes after, the smaller thing, the thing they did not treat as dangerous, that earns the entry. Cactus shoots back. The saguaro cactus is not a plant that grows quickly. A saguaro that stands 20 feet tall has been growing for somewhere between 100 and 150 years. The ones that develop the large lateral arms that define the silhouette most people associate with the American Southwest are older still. The arms do not begin to appear until the cactus is roughly 75 years old, and they continue to grow and thicken for decades after that. A mature saguaro with a full set of arms is a structure that has been accumulating mass and water and physical weight since before anyone currently living in Arizona was born. The largest arms on a fully mature saguaro can weigh several hundred pounds. The state of Arizona recognizes this in its law. Damaging or destroying a saguaro cactus is a criminal offense, and depending on the size and age of the cactus, it can be charged as a felony. The Lake Pleasant area sits northwest of Phoenix in Maricopa County. It is desert terrain, hot and dry, populated by the full range of Sonoran desert plant life, including stands of mature saguaro cacti that have been growing in that ground for well over a century. On February 4th, 1982, David Grundman and his companion, a man named James Soucek, were in the desert outside Phoenix in that area. Grundman had a shotgun with him. Grundman began shooting at saguaro cacti. He selected a smaller cactus first and fired multiple shotgun rounds into it. The repeated impacts from the shotgun blasts were sufficient to structurally compromise the smaller cactus, and it eventually toppled. When it fell, it struck Grundman. The smaller cactus did not injure him seriously. He was hit, he was unharmed enough to continue, and he continued. He then selected a second target. The second saguaro was substantially larger than the first. Contemporary accounts describe it as approximately 26 feet tall. Based on the growth rate of saguaro cacti, a specimen of that height in that region would have been well over 100 years old. It had at least one large lateral arm, the kind that develops over decades of growth and accumulates significant mass as it does. Grundman positioned himself near the base of this cactus and began firing. He fired his first shotgun blast into the base of the large saguaro. The base of a mature saguaro is the structural foundation of the entire plant. The internal structure of a saguaro consists of a series of woody ribs that run vertically through the cactus, and the tissue between and around those ribs holds water, in some cases hundreds of gallons of it, giving the plant both its mass and its rigidity. Shotgun impacts at the base begin to compromise that structural integrity at the point where the trunk supports the weight of everything above it, including the arms. He fired a second blast into the base of the same cactus. The two impacts in close proximity at the base of the trunk had now created a zone of structural damage at the connection point between the trunk and one of the large lateral arms. The arm above that damaged zone was still attached to the trunk, but the material holding it there had been compromised by the two shotgun blasts. The arm was large. It had been growing for decades. It weighed, by estimates reported in subsequent accounts of the incident, approximately 500 pounds. The arm separated from the trunk and fell. The direction of the fall placed it directly onto David Grundman, a 500-pound mass of cactus material falling from the height at which a large saguaro arm grows struck him with force sufficient to kill him at the scene. Jim Soucek witnessed the arm come down. Soucek moved to contact emergency services. Maricopa County emergency personnel and law enforcement responded to the location in the Lake Pleasant area. The response required reaching a desert location, which meant navigating terrain that was not on a road or immediately accessible. Responders reached Grundman and assessed his condition. He was found dead at the scene. The cause of death was the impact from the falling cactus arm. Law enforcement personnel responding to the scene noted the circumstances. Grundman had been engaged in the illegal destruction of protected saguaro cacti at the time of his death. He had been committing a criminal offense under Arizona state law when the consequences arrived. The responding officers documented the scene, the shotgun, the damaged cacti, and the position of the arm that had come down. The Arizona Republic reported on the incident. The details were straightforward. A man had been shooting at a protected cactus in the Arizona desert. The cactus had shed an arm that weighed approximately 500 pounds, and the arm had killed him. The legal note in the reporting was consistent. The activity was illegal before it became fatal. In the years following the incident, the case became one of the most frequently cited examples in Darwin Award discussions, partly because the mechanism of death was so precisely symmetrical with the action that caused it. Grundman had been trying to bring the cactus down. The cactus brought him down instead, using the arms he had been shooting at to do it. Rooftop camera fall. Wu Yongning was 26 years old and had built a following on Chinese social media platforms by doing something that required no equipment, no team, and no permission, climbing to the tops of skyscrapers and filming the experience. The activity has a name, rooftopping, and it exists as a subculture in cities with tall buildings and varying degrees of security. The practitioners climb to places they are not supposed to be, film themselves there, and post the footage. Wu had done this repeatedly across multiple cities in China, filming himself on ledges, hanging from railings, and performing movements at heights that would be immediately fatal if anything went wrong. His following on Weibo and Miaopai, two major Chinese social media platforms, had grown as a result. He was not unknown. He was, within the specific community of people who followed this kind of content, a recognized figure. By November of 2017, Wu had announced a financial motivation for an upcoming stunt. The details of this announcement were reported by Chinese outlets including The Paper, known in Chinese as Pengpai Xinwen, one of China's more rigorous digital news organizations. Wu stated that he intended to use prize money from completing a challenge to cover the cost of his mother's medical surgery and to fund an engagement ring for his girlfriend. Whether this motivation was communicated to followers before the November stunt or reconstructed afterward from his communications is part of the reporting record. The financial need was documented. On November 8, 2017, Wu traveled to a high-rise building in Changsha, the capital city of Hunan province in central China. The specific building is described in reporting as one of the tallest structures in Changsha, at approximately 62 floors. Wu arrived at the building and accessed the roof. He set up his camera on the roof edge, mounting it in a fixed position designed to record what he was about to do. The camera was pointed at the ledge where he intended to perform. He was alone. Wu positioned himself on the exterior of the building at the roof level, approximately 62 stories above the street below. He was holding onto the ledge of the rooftop structure with no safety equipment of any kind. No harness, no rope, no partner. The camera was running. The footage it captured is the primary factual record of what happened next, and that footage was later retrieved and confirmed by reporting from the paper and by Changsha police, who investigated the incident. Wu began performing pull-ups on the ledge. He was hanging from the edge of the rooftop, his hands gripping the ledge, his body suspended over the street 62 floors below, and he was executing pull-up movements, raising and lowering his body by the strength of his arms and grip alone. This was the content. The performance of an exercise at an altitude and exposure level that transformed an ordinary physical movement into something visually extreme. The camera recorded him doing this. His grip failed. The footage shows the moment his hands lost their hold on the ledge. The precise reason for the grip failure is not documented beyond the footage itself. Whether his hands were tired, whether the surface was slippery, whether he misjudged a movement. The camera records the result, but not the specific cause. His hands came off the ledge. He was unable to recover his grip. The distance between his hands and the ledge, once the grip broke, was small, but small distances at that height and in that body position, hanging below the roof edge, do not allow for recovery. He could not pull himself back up. His hands did not find the ledge again. Wu Yongning fell approximately 45 feet from the roof edge onto a lower terrace of the building in Changsha. The camera mounted on the roof edge continued recording after he fell. The footage captured the moment of the fall and continued running after he was gone from the frame. The footage was retrieved following his death. Changsha police were notified and responded. Wu's death was confirmed. The investigation by local authorities established the cause of death as the fall from the building. The paper reported on the case, providing the verified account of the circumstances, the location, the date of November 8, 2017, and the confirmation from police. International outlets, including English-language news organizations, picked up the story from the paper's reporting. The footage showing Wu performing pull-ups on the ledge and then falling was uploaded to Chinese social media after his death. It circulated on Weibo and other platforms before moderators removed it. The speed with which it spread and was then taken down is part of the documented record of the case. Wu Yongning is identified in reporting as one of the most prominent figures in China's rooftoping community and the most extensively documented fatality within it. His camera recorded the entire event. There was no witness other than the footage itself. Mortar on head. Calais is a small city in Washington County, in the far eastern corner of Maine, situated on the border with the Canadian province of New Brunswick. Its population is measured in the low thousands. On July 4, 2015, it was a holiday, Independence Day, and people across the country were using consumer fireworks to mark the occasion. Consumer fireworks sales and use are legal in Maine, and the category of fireworks available to the public includes reloadable mortar kits. A reloadable mortar kit consists of a tube, typically made from a heavy cardboard or similarly rigid material, and a set of shells that are loaded into the tube one at a time. The shell is dropped into the tube, the fuse is lit, and the shell fires upward out of the tube before detonating in the air above. The tube is the launch platform. It sits on the ground, pointed upward, and the force of the shell's ignition propels it out the open top of the tube. Devon Staples was 22 years old and was celebrating the 4th of July with friends and family in Calais. His brother Cody Staples was present. Cody Staples is the primary source for the details of what happened, having spoken directly to the Associated Press in the reporting that followed. Cody told the Associated Press that Devon had been drinking during the celebration. This detail is part of the documented record of the case, reported by the wire service from a direct interview with an eyewitness who was also a family member. The group was using reloadable mortar fireworks during the celebration. The mortars had been functioning as intended, shells loaded into the tube, fuses lit, shells fired upward, detonations in the sky above. At some point during the evening, Devon Staples picked up a mortar tube and placed it on top of his head. The mortar tube, positioned on top of Devon Staples' head, was oriented with its closed base resting against his skull and its open end pointing upward. While the tube was oriented right side up, using a human head as a launch platform meant the intense downward recoil of the launch would be directed straight into his skull. In the operational position, the tube sits on the ground with the open end up, and the shell fires upward and away from the operator. In the position Devon Staples had placed it, the closed base rested on his skull, meaning the explosive pressure of the launch would drive directly downward into his head. Cody Staples told the Associated Press that he and others present told Devon not to do it. This detail is in the published record. The people around Devon Staples saw what he was doing and told him to stop. Devon Staples lit the fuse. The mortar shell ignited inside the tube. The ignition of a mortar shell inside its launch tube generates the propulsive force that under normal circumstances sends the shell upward and away from the tube at speed. In this configuration, as the shell fired upward out of the tube, the explosive recoil against the sealed base delivered catastrophic force directly into his skull. Devon Staples died instantly at the scene. There was no interval between the ignition and the death, no period during which medical intervention was possible or relevant. He was killed by the discharge at the moment it occurred. Cody Staples was present when his brother died. Emergency services were called to the location in Calais. Responders arrived to find Devon Staples deceased. The nature of the injury was immediately apparent to responding personnel, and there was no medical procedure to perform. Death was confirmed at the scene. The Maine Department of Public Safety confirmed the death and its circumstances. The Associated Press published its report on July 5, 2015, the day after the incident, citing Cody Staples as the eyewitness source for the account of what had happened. The story was picked up by news organizations nationally. Cody Staples' quote to the Associated Press is part of the published record. He said, "He was a great person who made a stupid decision." Devon Staples was 22 years old. The incident occurred on the date most associated with consumer fireworks used in the United States and is referenced in fireworks safety reporting as a documented example of the consequences of the most extreme category of misuse. Rocket Man falls. Michael Blaine Hughes, known publicly as Mad Mike Hughes, was 64 years old and had spent the better part of a decade building and launching homemade steam-powered rockets from desert locations in the American Southwest. He was a self-taught rocket builder, a limousine driver by trade for much of his working life, and a committed proponent of flat Earth theory. These facts coexisted in Hughes without apparent contradiction. He believed the Earth was flat, he believed the way to confirm this was to photograph it from sufficient altitude, and he believed the way to reach that altitude was in a rocket he built himself. He had launched previous versions of his rockets from desert locations in California, and had survived those launches, sustaining injuries in at least one of them. He continued building. The injuries were not minor exaggerations added after the fact. In 2014, Hughes launched a steam-powered rocket that reached an altitude of roughly 1,374 feet. In March of 2018, flying a later version of the same design from a site near Amboy, California, he reached approximately 1,875 feet. Hit speeds as associate Waldo Stakes, who helped build his rockets, estimated at around 350 miles per hour, and had to deploy a second parachute after the first failed to slow him enough. He landed hard enough to injure his back and required paramedics on site, and told reporters afterward that the rocket wants to kill you 10 different ways. He also held a Guinness World Record from 2002 for the longest ramp jump in a limousine, a stunt in which he cleared just over 100 feet in a Lincoln Town car. By the time of the Cactus Dry Lake launch, Hughes had also announced plans for a Raccoon, a hybrid rocket and balloon craft intended to carry him to an altitude of 62.1 miles, the internationally recognized boundary of space, so that he could photograph the Earth's shape for himself. That launch never happened. Hughes had a documented history of conflict with the Federal Aviation Administration. The FAA regulates airspace in the United States, and launching a rocket, even a homemade one, into that airspace requires permits and approvals. Hughes had sought permissions, been denied or delayed, and had relocated launches to avoid FAA jurisdiction on multiple occasions. The selection of launch sites in remote desert locations was not accidental. Hughes was actively choosing terrain that minimized the regulatory obstacles to his launches. By early 2020, he had found a location he intended to use, Cactus Dry Lake, a dry lake bed in San Bernardino County, California, near the town of Barstow. The launch, scheduled for February 22, 2020, was not a private affair. A film crew from the Science Channel was present to document it for a series the network was producing, titled Homemade Astronauts. The presence of a professional television production crew at the launch site is significant as a factual matter because it means the event was publicly planned, the media had been invited, and there were multiple trained observers with professional recording equipment present at the scene. The launch of Hughes's rocket on that day was not spontaneous. It was a scheduled media-attended event. Cactus Dry Lake is flat, open, and remote, the kind of terrain that makes a rocket launch site in the practical sense. There is room, there are no structures nearby, and the ground is firm. Hughes's rocket was positioned at the launch site on the dry lake bed. The rocket was steam-powered, using superheated steam as the propellant. Hughes had built the rocket himself. The parachute system, designed to deploy at altitude and slow the rocket's descent back to the ground, was a critical component. Without correct parachute deployment, the rocket would return to the ground at a speed it and its occupant could not survive. On February 22, 2020, Hughes entered his rocket at the launch site on Cactus Dry Lake. The Science Channel film crew was positioned to document the launch. The rocket was prepared for ignition. Hughes had done this before and survived. The rocket was ignited. The rocket launched from the desert floor and began its ascent. The steam propulsion system functioned and the rocket moved upward from the launch site. The trajectory in the initial moments of the launch appeared to be working. Then the parachute system activated. The parachute was designed to deploy at altitude at the top of the rocket's arc when the vehicle had slowed and was beginning to descend. Instead, the parachute canopy snagged on the launch apparatus during liftoff, deploying prematurely and tearing away from the rocket moments after ignition. The physical impact with the launch frame ripped the canopy free before the rocket even cleared the launch site. With its recovery parachute torn away at takeoff, the rocket continued its unguided arc before falling back to the desert floor. The rocket did not complete a stable ascent. The loss of the recovery parachute at liftoff removed the deceleration system that was supposed to deploy at peak altitude. The rocket fell back to the desert floor. It impacted the ground at Cactus Dry Lake at the launch site. The Science Channel film crew and the other personnel on site at the launch witnessed the crash. Emergency services were contacted and responded. San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department personnel traveled to the dry lake bed at Cactus Dry Lake. Hughes was found dead at the crash site. He was 64 years old. The Sheriff's Department confirmed the death. The Associated Press reported on the crash on February 22, 2020, and the story was carried by news organizations internationally. The footage captured by the Science Channel production crew at the launch site documented the launch, the premature parachute deployment, and the crash. The network did not broadcast the footage of the crash in full, but clips circulated online following the incident. Hughes became one of a very small number of people in the Darwin Award category of cases to have died in the presence of a professional television crew that had traveled specifically to document what he was doing. The camera was rolling. The parachute came out at the wrong moment. The rest followed directly from that. Serpents twice. Serpent handling as a religious practice has existed in certain Pentecostal communities in the Appalachian region of the United States since the early 20th century. The theological basis is a passage from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 16, verses 17 and 18, which states in some translations that believers will pick up snakes with their hands and will not be harmed. Practitioners of serpent handling take this passage literally. During religious services, they handle venomous snakes, typically rattlesnakes or copperheads, native to the Appalachian region, as an act of faith. The snakes are not defanged. They are venomous. Bites occur. Some practitioners survive multiple bites over the course of years. Some do not survive. The practice is illegal in several states, though enforcement varies. The communities that practice it are generally small, insular, and located in rural areas of Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, and neighboring states. Mac Wolford was a bishop in one of these churches. He was a well-known figure in the serpent handling community of West Virginia, and he had continued the practice despite a specific and direct precedent in his own family. His father, Mac Wolford Sr., had died of a rattlesnake bite sustained during a religious service. The son continued handling serpents after the father's death. By 2012, Mac Wolford was leading his own congregation in organizing outdoor religious services that drew attendance from this broader serpent handling community. On May 27, 2012, Wolford organized and led an outdoor religious service at Panther State Forest, located near Bluefield in Mercer County, West Virginia. The service was attended by members of his congregation and others. The Washington Post had been following Wolford's ministry as part of a longer reporting project on Appalachian religious traditions, and a journalist was present at the service. Snakes were present at the service, as they would be at any serpent handling gathering. One of them was a yellow timber rattlesnake. During the service, the yellow timber rattlesnake bit Mac Wolford. A timber rattlesnake bite delivers hemotoxic venom, a type that damages blood cells and tissue and causes significant internal effects if left untreated. The treatment for a rattlesnake bite is antivenom, which is available at hospitals and can be administered to stop the progression of the venom's effects. Wolford did not seek medical treatment. He stated that his faith would protect him. This was not an uninformed position on his part. He had been in this tradition his entire life. He understood what a rattlesnake bite meant, and he chose not to go to the hospital. Others at the service were aware of what had happened. Wolford's condition deteriorated over the hours following the bite. Rattlesnake venom does not act instantaneously. It works progressively, and the effects become more severe as time passes without treatment. He was brought to a private home as his condition worsened. By the time others present contacted emergency services, Wolford was in critical condition. He died on May 27, 2012, the same day he was bitten. The Washington Post's reporting on his death was among the most detailed published accounts of a serpent handling fatality, given that a journalist had been present at the service. Jamie Coots was a pastor at the Full Gospel Tabernacle in Jesus' Name, a church in Middlesboro, Kentucky, in Bell County, near the Cumberland Gap. Coots had been bitten by venomous snakes at least 9 times before February of 2014 and had survived each of those bites. One of the prior bites had cost him part of a finger, which had been lost to the tissue damage caused by the venom. He was by any measure experienced with the consequences of what he was doing. He had also achieved a public profile beyond his congregation. In 2013, the National Geographic Channel had broadcast a reality series called Snake Salvation, which featured Coots and his church. He was not an obscure figure. While Wolford's father had died from a snake bite, Coots was continuing a multi-generational family tradition alongside his father, Gregory Coots, who was also a serpent-handling pastor. On February 15, 2014, Coots was leading a service at the Full Gospel Tabernacle in Jesus' Name in Middlesboro when he was bitten by a rattlesnake. The bite occurred during the service in the church in front of his congregation. Following the bite, Coots left the church and went to his home, which was nearby. He refused medical attention. This refusal was consistent with his stated beliefs and with the practice of his community. He had survived 9 previous bites by refusing treatment. He chose the same course of action on February 15th. Coots died at his home that evening from the effects of the rattlesnake bite. Local emergency services confirmed the death. He was 42 years old. News of his death was reported nationally, partly because of his television profile. The National Geographic Channel had aired Snake Salvation the year before his death, and reporters covering the story referenced the series in their accounts. The 2 cases, Wolford in 2012 and Coots in 2014, are presented together because their structure is identical in every relevant respect. Both men were Appalachian Pentecostal serpent-handling pastors. Both were bitten by rattlesnakes during religious services. Both refused available medical treatment. Both died from the bites. While Wolford had a father who died from a snake bite, Coots had family members who shared the practice, including his father and his son Cody. The generational repetition is part of the documented record in both cases, not an editorial addition. Wolford's father died of a snake bite years prior. The sons continued. The sons died. The practice continued in both communities after their deaths. The Darwin Award criteria require that the person be of sound mind, past the legal driving age, and the sole cause of their own death. Both Wolford and Coots meet all 4 criteria. The snakes were the mechanism. The refusal of treatment was the decision. Wired for death. Michael Anderson Godwin was convicted in South Carolina in the early 1980s of robbery and murder, a crime that under state law at the time carried the possibility of a death sentence. He was sentenced to die in South Carolina's electric chair, the method of execution the state used for capital cases. He was sent to the Central Correctional Institution in Columbia to await his execution. In 1983, following an appeal and a retrial, his death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Godwin left death row and entered the general prison population. The electric chair, the specific instrument that had been the intended method of his death, was no longer part of his future. That was the official record. What happened next was not. Inmates at the Central Correctional Institution were permitted to keep small personal televisions in their cells on the condition that they use headphones rather than external speakers, so as not to disturb neighboring cells. Godwin had a television and a set of headphones in his cell. At some point in March of 1989, the wiring on the headphones or the television set malfunctioned. Godwin decided to repair it himself. He was sitting on the toilet in his cell while he worked on the wiring. The toilet, a standard prison fixture of the period, was made of metal and bolted to the wall and floor, offering no insulation between an occupant and the building's plumbing and grounding. Godwin held the wire in his hands as he worked and at some point brought it to his mouth and bit into it, a fairly ordinary way to strip or test a wire by feel when other tools are not on hand. The wire was live. The current passed through his mouth and body, and the metal toilet beneath him, seated and grounded, gave it a direct path to complete a circuit rather than dissipating harmlessly. He was electrocuted in his cell. Prison staff found him afterward. Richland County Coroner Frank Barron examined the body and documented severe burns to Godwin's mouth and tongue, consistent with the entry point of the current, and concluded the death was accidental. A spokesman for the South Carolina Department of Corrections confirmed the circumstances to reporters at the time, calling it a strange accident. The case circulated for years afterward, primarily because of the coincidence at its center. A man who had been sentenced to die in the electric chair, and whose sentence had been commuted specifically to spare him that death, was killed anyway by an electrical current, sitting on a metal seat in the same prison system that had once scheduled his execution. In 1994, the Darwin Awards organization reviewed the case against its own verification standards and formally added it to the archive under the title Seat of Knowledge. Never happened. The most famous Darwin Award case is not in this video because it never happened. The JATO rocket car story circulated in the mid-1990s as a forwarded email long before social media existed to accelerate the spread of unverified stories. The story described a man in the Arizona desert who had obtained a JATO unit, a jet-assisted takeoff rocket of the kind used to help heavy military aircraft lift off short runways, and had duct-taped it to a Chevrolet Impala. According to the email, he ignited the rocket on a long straight stretch of desert road, reached an estimated 350 miles per hour, became airborne, and impacted a cliff face at a high elevation, leaving a crater. The Arizona Department of Public Safety stated in 1996 that no such incident existed in any of their records. The Mythbusters team tested the concept in their 2003 pilot episode and determined it was physically implausible as described. The Darwin Awards organization, which had already built a significant following around the story, reclassified it as a legend and kept it in the archive in its own category. It is not a real death. The same email chain that distributed the JATO rocket car story included a reference to a previous Darwin Award winner, a person who had allegedly been killed by a vending machine that fell on them after they attempted to tip it. That specific name case was also invented. It did not happen. The category of vending machine tipping deaths, however, turned out to be real. The Consumer Product Safety Commission has documented cases of people being killed by vending machines that tipped over while being rocked or tilted in an attempt to dislodge a stuck item. The category is genuine. The specific previous winner named in the original email was not. A third story that circulated widely and continues to circulate describes a scuba diver who was found dead in a burned forest, still in full scuba gear, inside a tree. The explanation offered in the story is that a firefighting aircraft, the kind that scoops water from a lake to drop on a fire, scooped up the diver along with the water and dropped him into the burning forest. This story is physically impossible given how firefighting aircraft operate. The water intake systems on these aircraft move water at a rate and in conditions that are not compatible with the described sequence, and no incident of this kind appears in any verified record anywhere. It is fiction. The distinction between the verified cases and the invented ones is not a matter of degree. It is categorical. Northcutt's published criteria for a genuine Darwin Award require 5 things. The event has to be verifiable through independent sources. The death or sterilization has to result directly from the person's own actions. The person has to have been capable of rational judgment. The person has to be past the legal driving age. And the act has to demonstrate an astonishing lack of judgment rather than simple bad luck. The JATO rocket car story fails the first test outright, since no state agency, hospital, or newspaper anywhere has ever produced a record of it. The vending machine story fails the same test in its original named form. Even though the broader category it describes, people crushed by vending machines they were rocking to free a stuck item, is documented by the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission in multiple real incidents over the years. The scuba diver in a tree story fails on pure physics before it even reaches the question of sourcing. What separates Gary Hoy from the JATO driver or Devon Staples from the vending machine victim is that Hoy's case has a coroner's report, a Toronto police response, and newspaper coverage from the day it happened, and Staples' case has an Associated Press wire story built on a direct interview with his brother. The chain email stories have none of that. They have only the shape of a Darwin Award, repeated and embellished, until the shape was all that was left. The cases that are in this video are the ones that passed the original 4 rules, verified by real sources and real eyewitnesses. Astoundingly stupid judgment, not merely unlucky. Past the legal driving age, of sound mind. Done entirely to themselves. Gary Hoy's window frame separated from the wall. Franz Reichelt's suit collapsed around him on the way down. Clement Vallandigham picked up the loaded pistol. Karel Soucek's barrel hit the rim. Bobby Leech slipped on an orange peel. David Grundman's cactus shed an arm. Wu Yongning's grip failed. Devon Staples lit the fuse. Mad Mike Hughes' parachute came out at launch. Mac Wolford and Jamie Coots refused the anti-venom. Michael Anderson Godwin bit into a live wire in the one place the state could no longer legally kill him. The archive of fabrications exists because the true cases are remarkable enough to generate imitations. The real ones do not need embellishment. They are exactly what they are. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.